Hi, everyone. My name's Sayal, and we are here to talk about communication and alignment. I'm currently the Director of Product Experience at Kazoo. And, sorry about that.
No, good.
And we are a used car retailer, and we've grown pretty quickly. I was in the first couple dozen employees, and now we're over 3,500 in 2 years. And so that kind of growth leads to lots of communication challenges. And my friends and I today are going to talk about how you scale communication and how you just communicate effectively across disciplines and across functions. Obviously, product thinking is super important, but making sure that people are aligned and working towards the same thing is super key and crucial. So what I want to do very quickly is pass around a quick round of introductions. We'll start there and just kind of work our way down, and then I'll ask the first question.
Great. I'm Sam Bradley. I'm a Director of Product at Expedia Group. I've been based in London roughly for the last 5 years, originally from the States. And so I've worked on a bunch of different areas of product within Expedia, but over the last couple of years I've been in content and leading our reviews platforms.
I'm Jason Knight. So I'm the product director for a RegTech firm based in London called Dudil. We've actually just recently gone through a merger, so that's obviously introduced a lot of communication. Oh, is it not working?
Do you want to just use it?
Use that.
I'll try that again. I'm Jason. I'm the product director at a London-based RegTech firm called Dudil, and as I was trying to say, we have recently gone through a merger as well, so there's a lot of additional communication barriers and communication problems that when you're trying to kind of cross between two teams as well, or two completely separate companies. So that's definitely been interesting, and yeah, really keen to help, as Sayal says, really help to drive that product thinking and that product communication through the business.
My name is Hannah Okert-Axelson. I am a senior product manager at Accurex. Accurex is a health tech company that builds communication software for the NHS. So if you've ever gotten an SMS from your GP, maybe about a COVID vaccination, it's probably my company. I'm pretty new to the product world. I've only been here for around 2 years. I was in academia before. I was in nonprofits before. But kind of the theme that's run through all of these things is around building really strong teams and how really strong teams need to be able to communicate with each other no matter where you are.
Cool, thanks. I'm Chris. I'm in product operations, so slightly different to the other panelists. I work at Farfetch. If anyone saw the panel earlier, Victor gave a really nice introduction to what our vision is, so I don't have to repeat it. But we are the global platform for luxury products. I work in a space where there's around 150 product people, so that's design, research, and product management of various levels. And then when you scale that out to the other teams that we work with, we're in the sort of high hundreds. So definitely challenges when communicating knowledge.
Cool. So our first question, and I'd like to start with, let's start with Chris. Tell us a little bit about how you tackle some of the challenges in like scaling communication.
Many and various challenges, I think. I think one of the things that we talk about quite a lot in operations is in terms of like storytelling and the way that we storytell communication and sharing that knowledge through storytelling. So especially in this like asynchronous world, we've probably grown in the past 2 years about 50% just in our space. So actually, asynchronicity is actually becoming incredibly important for us, and the capabilities of our people to write things down and to share them in an asynchronous manner instead of on various and multiple calls. My calendar is still booked with calls, and that's one of the challenges that I have. But we are trying to help and coach people to write better things down and to remove some of those documentation barriers as well.
Okay. Let's go over to Jason. What are some of the challenges that you face scaling communication?
So I think, obviously similar changes like with regards to the asynchronicity, I think it's really important. I think one of the challenges of that though is making sure that people have actually read and continue to read. Like it's all well and good to to have an asynchronous communication, but if people aren't reading them, then it's, you don't have that initial or that immediate feedback loop. And I think just in general, and again, touching on the merger thing as well, like obviously when you're bringing two very different companies together and trying to, so the company's doubled in size now, like, we've got up to about 80 people, and I think the biggest problem for me is making sure that everyone in that company actually understands what it is that we're actually claiming to do in the combined company. Because everyone's got their own opinion based on where they came from before. And there's this kind of cliche that you have to ask from the top down and the bottom up, and hopefully you get the same message all the way through. You don't always, and I think that's a bit of a pipe dream. But yeah, just making sure that as all of these people come together and all the different functions are now combining, I think it's a really tricky balance to make sure that you do get that alignment, but that you're not boring people by talking them all the time. So.
Sure. Hannah, Accurex has gone through a very big journey of growth. What are some of the challenges that you've faced?
So one of the interesting things with Accurex's growth is it's very aligned to the COVID pandemic. As the pandemic developed, healthcare providers needed more and more solutions to be able to run consultations remotely. But that was also the time where our team was going completely remote. So all of the things we used to be able to do by having bump-ins in the hallways and those coffee chats, we're now all turning into half-hour blocks in people's calendars, and it was becoming really rigid. And I think that makes a lot of the communication feel a lot more tiring. And when you're feeling already tired from a global pandemic and trying to deliver really impactful products and make changes and get the right stakeholders in the right virtual room, that makes it really hard to make sure the right message comes across. I think even without being remote or being now a hybrid model, as I'm sure a lot of companies are facing, one of the things that we often see when we're scaling is the difference of like our communication channels like Slack. When I joined Accurex, we were 20 people. Slack was a very different world than being 150 people. Now, if I'm off for 2 weeks, like there's 50 messages in general that I've now missed, and these are all really important updates from the commercial team, and a new operations protocol that we're doing, and I have loads to catch up on. So it's really hard to figure out the ways to scale that communication, especially in your virtual channels, to make sure you have the attention of the right people who need to hear those messages.
Sure. And Sam, obviously Expedia is like a very different scale from Accurex. What are some things that work about the ways y'all communicate right now?
Yeah, we're, I believe, now in 53 countries. We have teams all over the world. So I think a big part of it, similar to what everyone said, communication, documentation is important. It's been a very tribal company to where, I can't stand a document, so I have a hard time telling other people to. So the more, that message can carry over as you're working with other groups, I think is important. But, COVID complicates that. I think a big part of it for a long time was getting to travel and getting to interact with some of these other offices we have. There's a lot of offices, obviously, that might not have a product presence. So, culturally, I think a big part of it, if you're not near a hub where there's just kind of the principles of how we are, designing and leading and trying to make progress on the principles of the company, that message can get lost. So similar to what Chris said, I think a big part of it is storytelling. And, we kind of view our product leaders and any individual product manager as part of that job is always carrying over that same story of, how are our users interacting with any different part of the company, whether it's an internal user, on a platform now that we're managing multiple different brands, or travelers or partners, to where, even if it doesn't directly impact someone's work, it's hopefully at least, we can build the empathy so people understand why we're making some of the decisions we are, even if they're very far from it, and they just see the impact more than have a direct say or really, we're around with some of the decisions getting made.
I think one of the interesting things about that challenge that you just said is ensuring that you moderate the message to the, like if you're working with 53 countries or whatever, that not everyone's going to want to work in the same way, and there's going to be different cultural norms in these countries. So that's not something that I have to put up with at the moment, but it's something that I've worked with before, and it's definitely interesting trying to make sure you get that balance right.
Let's stick with Sam. Next question is, who would you say is on the tail end of your information train? Like, who is the information caboose?
Great question. So I think there's a lot of commercial and regional marketing teams that fight harder than anyone, I think, for a lot of the local insights they have on destinations where we obviously have a presence and plenty of supply, and it can be challenging to work with the global product teams to have a voice, I think, and take into account where we're not just trying to solve for the mass, which is generally the way that we have to be organized. I think there can even be a lot of those changes of what we're trying to go after that impact them without, really setting themselves up for success. So it's something where you end up having a lot of direct conversations just because they might not have the opportunity to, hear those same things or be in where product's getting talked about and some of those decisions are made. So yeah, some of the regional teams, I'd say.
Hannah, same question. Who would you say is on your information caboose?
So I was thinking about this when Sam was answering, and what's really interesting being a product manager is that I'm often thinking I really need to over-communicate everything so my stakeholders know what I'm doing and remember what I'm doing, and we did agree to this and we're still on the path to do this. But I often think of like the end of the information trail is like that member on the support team or that member in the customer success team that probably isn't one of my stakeholders, isn't one of the main people I'm trying to get my message across to, who still has kind of a stake and is going to be affected by any product changes that I do. And I would say I love the storytelling theme, and I try to think about really practically how can I do that with like a Slack update in the product channel. Like every Slack update I have has a TLDR, one sentence overview. If you're not going to read the whole thing, read the TLDR. It probably has 6 emojis in it to try to like really be eye-catching. Might have a GIF there as well. Like how can you really get someone's attention to get kind of that headline news, even if it's not your key stakeholder, your key decision maker.
Yeah, I think being in operations, you see multiple different communication trends across the whole organization. Definitely some of there's on various levels as well. So I think we're slightly challenged with at the moment because of scale. So going back to that original question, just visibility of our product changes. We have 50 product people at various levels that are all making changes, testing things, experimenting across various different products. And just having that visibility internally in that team and then linking out to business partners, of which we have hundreds, is incredibly challenging. I get the view of all of that and actually trying to understand the best places to go into to see where those challenges are and then to try and alleviate some of that pressure is kind of the position I'm in.
Okay.
Can I jump in again?
Yeah.
I'm going to change my answer based on what Chris said. I think we really struggle to communicate with the frontline teams. So, it's easy to roll out products and think like, okay, well, there's general readiness that hopefully someone else is communicating, but, not preparing either our customer service teams or depending on the type of business, there are a lot of account managers that are still working with, properties and suppliers, activities, flights, hotels, et cetera. And, we can roll out changes that we may not see an impact on a grand scale, but individually you could create a terrible experience for one side of our marketplace, and then our frontline teams aren't even set up to know why this change happened. So I think that's where we have to continue to get better, and I think there's such a disconnect between product and some of the decisions we're making and some of those teams. I spent a little bit of time on our vacation rental side, which is much more of a peer-to-peer marketplace, and ended up spending as much time as possible with our CS teams and with sales because they were hearing so much insight that I think really can fix some of the stickiest problems that you'll never see in just the global data. I think that's always an untapped opportunity to really understand your users and be able to solve for anyone in your company being able to help the travelers in our case or help the customers in general.
Yeah, so pardon me. I think we're obviously a smaller company, so you'd imagine that it would be pretty easy. You just go and have a chat or whatever, right? But even in a 40 or now 80 person company, you tend to find that information kind of atrophies pretty. I kind of was thinking about on the way here, like this idea that as soon as you stop talking to someone about something, or immediately the alignment starts to drift. But you obviously can't talk to them all the time because you never get anything else done. So I think for me, though, the biggest challenge in that area is, we're selling into the enterprise, we're selling to banks, we're selling to big insurance companies. We're an enterprise play, so we're very sales-led. And if we're talking about the end of the information pipeline and what I need to do the most work on, it's with that sales team. We have an enterprise sales team, we have enterprise account managers, they're working with these people all the time. They're working with their accounts, they're working with new prospects, and of course getting dragged around a bit by the requirements that are coming up from these very high value customers as well. So I think making sure that we drive alignment with those people is definitely one of my big focus areas, and I think it's something that I've certainly seen before, and I've read and listened to other people talk about this idea that actually in many cases like sales and product, they kind of don't get along, and I argue that they probably should, but obviously to do that you really have to have that really open conversation with them and really keep aligned with them. And I actually probably spend more time trying to bridge that gap than I do with, say, the engineers or the designers or whoever else, because it requires so much work, and if you don't get it right, then it has a massive impact.
Cool. Appreciate that our audience has been super respectful and kind, but it's always more helpful for them to hear a little bit about case studies or real mistakes. So who wants to go first and talk about a mistake they've made this year? It's November, and it's time to get a little spicy. Everyone has made mistakes this year.
So I can think of one recently, and it's actually been brought more to a head because of the merger, of course, because again you've got all these different styles of people. I think what we do, and I know lots of people do this, is every couple of weeks, like a show and tell. Let's tell the entire company what's going on. These are all the things that we've done. These are all the things that we're doing. Isn't everyone excited? Have a clap and whatever. And that's fantastic. And I thought that was going quite well, and everyone was generally, to your face, quite respectful and said that was good. But actually, as it turns out recently, you start getting feedback. It's like, that's not really hitting the spot, because it's just silly things like not sending an agenda around before, saying people don't know what they're coming to get. So if they turn up to the wrong one, then it's like an engineering-led thing. Oh, look at these metrics that we've implemented or something like that. The sales team are like, well, I'm not going to that again. And you then get to this sort of situation where people start doubting whether it's worth going at all. And obviously just sending an agenda around and kind of marking up what these areas that we're talking about this week is actually, it sounds really stupid, but it would really help with that, because then people can come along. And also things like moving those metrics things that maybe not everyone's interested, or this new technical thing, to the end, so people can leave after they've seen the cool stuff. So it was a real shocker to me in a way, because I thought this was going down really well, and as it turned out, there was still quite a lot of work to do to get that to really hit the spot.
Thanks for sharing. Who else?
I can go. I can share a little bit of a case study that is currently ongoing, still to be solved. Our flagship product at Accurex allows GPs to send messages to patients. It's a desktop application that integrates with the medical record. It was designed in 2016 before we had product managers and before we had designers. It was a team of like 8 people, really scrappy, was an entrepreneur-first startup. And they figured it out, and it works really well, and people really like it. But it really looks like it was designed without product managers and without designers in 2016. So one of the tasks my team is undertaking is to do a facelift, give it a little bit of fresh coat of paint. And it turned from a 2 to 3 week project to now we've been working on it for 6 months, because it's the kind of thing of like, well, while we're doing this, let's also add this in, and let's add this in, and like, what about this? We can make this part so much better. And so it's turned into this whole like design experience rework. And I do think that's probably the right choice to make it a better experience. But now, coming to the end of the year, and I've worked at Accurex now for 2 Christmases, and this is the 3rd Christmas, there's always something weird that happens around Christmas, where there's like this artificial deadline of it needs to happen before people go on holiday. Because when you come back in the new year, you have new goals, the investors are coming back wanting to set new KPIs, and that old thing needed to have been wrapped up so that you could start the new thing. And so for the last 6 months, we've been working against a timeline to finish in February, March. And now that timeline's being challenged very fairly. Can we finish in December? And so I'm having a communication challenge with my different stakeholders to take a look at what does this list include that we're going to be able to get done? What's our engineering team actually going to be able to get out there? How much user testing do we want to do before we just release this to our 100,000 weekly active users who depend on us to send 2 million SMS to patients every week? There's lots of kind of risks to balance, and it's kind of an ongoing communication challenge in a very hybrid approach of sometimes getting everyone in a physical room saying, please come to the office this day, we really want to hash this out with a whiteboard, to lots of asynchronous chats on Slack and trying to make sure the right people have the right information.
Who in your organization is the hardest person to share information with, and why? Chris.
Oh, the hardest person.
Or team or
Or group
discipline?
of people. As mentioned previously, we're a platform company, and I think the consumer-facing teams, the ones that I work with, and the platform teams, there's quite often misalignment there, and communicating between those groups can be quite challenging, especially because our platform teams service other clients and customers, and we're kind of one of those and one of the larger ones. So I definitely think over the past couple of years that has improved immeasurably, but there's still quite a long way to go there, I think.
Let's go with Sam.
Marketing is just a pain in the ass comparatively to product. I mean, and in jest. But I think depending on the organization you're talking about, there's a different set of information you'd use to try to accomplish whatever you're doing, right? So it's going to be very detail-oriented with engineering, obviously very analytical-driven with some leaders and analytics in general. I think what we find in marketing is a disconnect on how we would measure or decide if something's working or not, and can be a little bit more art than science. And so, that can be at loggerheads on how we, what's ever going to be possible to make a decision on. I think especially in product, most decisions are complicated, right? It's not mostly a very clear, like, oh, well, the data clearly says this, we'll go out here. And so when you get into that political battle, that's the group I've had the most trouble with.
Okay, open question, first one to answer. And just kind of take it. How do you think about diversity and inclusion in information sharing?
I'll jump in for that one. I think that's something we talked about the other week, right? Like this is a real kind of challenging topic when it comes to knowledge sharing. And I think we have to realize that the majority of the people we work with are people and human beings, and we're all incredibly different, particularly when it comes to neurodiversity as well. And the way that we consume information and knowledge can be incredibly different between people and teams, and the way that those teams form and they collaborate together. And there's something I mentioned when we spoke about this earlier was software products like Miro or FigJam are fantastic for team collaboration and quick thinking and getting things out onto pages. But their accessibility when it comes to actually documenting things is the bar is too high, in my opinion. It becomes a very personal tool where the things that you put on there are quite personal to you. And if you weren't involved in the creation of those things, you're probably not going to understand what on earth's going on. And we're seeing more and more that people are using it as a documentation tool to share knowledge rather than just to collaborate quickly. And I think that's something we should think about when it comes to things like neurodiversity and the way that we consume information. Writing things down is good for some people. Reading is good for others. Watching short videos and doing that is good for other people. And just going back to what you mentioned earlier around like failure, I think that's one of the things I've realized over the past 2 years working in ops and working at Farfetch is we cannot apply a process or a ritual to 150 people and it works for everyone. We have to allow teams to figure that out themselves, given a core outcome of, okay, if you want to share knowledge and visibility of product progress, how are you going to figure out how that works for you? Not 150 people, 500 people going to a show and tell, which is a challenge that we've had as well.
I think that's a really good point, that different learning styles need different accommodations, and we should let teams kind of sort that out and make sure that they're speaking to the right people.
Yeah, I think that the point about neurodiversity is really important as well, because when people think about diversity, they rightly think of many, the more visible types of diversity that people bring up, and they definitely need to be they need to be supported. But neurodiversity is very invisible for the most part, and I think it's really important to make sure that you're making your information, help whatever that information is, but not even just information, also like meetings, for example. Like, some people aren't going to speak up in meetings. Some people are going to struggle to process enough information in real time to actually contribute to that meeting in real time. And I think it's just really important to call that out and make sure that you're either, if it is someone who's maybe from a marginalized group who doesn't feel confident in talking in front of you, have sidebars afterwards, or do anything that you can to give that person a safe space to share their opinions, because ultimately otherwise you just end up with the loudest, straightest, sissest people in the room just all sitting there shouting at each other, and everyone else isn't really getting to contribute. So I think it's really important to have that safe space.
Okay. So for the men on the panel, what are you doing in meetings to make room for more marginalized folks to share their opinions?
I'll start on that. I think, and I was going to build exactly off what Jason was just saying. I think you have to recognize who may not be speaking up, but I learned you can't also just like try to give space to someone without them being, comfortable and prepared for that, right? So some people might be able to jump on the spot, others want to kind of digest and be able to think about it, or maybe are never going to be comfortable sharing in a call or in a meeting. And so, I think if you think about, depending on the products you're building, like obviously everyone in the world hopefully can travel. So the experience that I have and build does not cover everyone in the world, right? So it's essential to have different voices think about what we're actually trying to accomplish. I'll never know the experience of, walking down a dark street trying to find a property, and am I going to feel comfortable or not? Like, that's just not something I've ever had to think about. So we're working to build a lot more I&D-based products in general, and how we even go about that has to do with, having people that are passionate about it across the company even speak up and explain those experiences, so that, instead of it being focused on like those groups, and I think you're right, I'm opinionated and talk plenty and have to remind myself, okay, give space to, other people. And I think especially it can be culturally, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's different offices that we're working with, a lot of those hierarchies can be different depending on, what someone's background is. But beyond that, we're looking across themes. So with reviews that we collect for travel, we've started to play around in this space. And I think one of the early takeaways we've had, both internally as we talk about it and go through research, is it's more about the theme. So it's more about, would people feel welcoming? Would people, feel like, what is the safety? And that can cover broad range instead of us trying to be like, hey, tell us who you are, therefore we try to make this a better experience. But yeah, starting with that, are there folks that represent a diverse group of what our consumers can be, or even just how we build even internal products, right? So I think just having the diversity and finding how someone would feel comfortable expressing themselves is a big part of it.
I think it's really important to look for two things in these meetings. So again, I can talk because I do that all the time, and it's something. But I've also got used to listening to myself as I talk as well, which I don't think everyone actually does. Like, I'm sure some people do, but I don't think everyone does. So listening to yourself and actually realizing when you've maybe gone on for a bit too long, when you're maybe maybe trying to interrupt yourself rather than just relying on someone else to interrupt you, but also watching for. It's not like a scorecard, but like watching how that's happening, because other people are going to be like that too. So other people will be in love with the sound of their own voices and going on for too long. And I think that being conscious of that and actually listening actively to what people are doing and keeping an eye on the dynamics in the room, so that people you maybe do have a chance to either point the spotlight on someone if you feel that they want to join in, or if they don't, at least take note of that and speak to them afterwards, have a one-to-one or something like that. But I think one of the things of remote working, which is actually kind of interesting, obviously on Zoom and everything else, is like the old hand raise feature, which actually, people wouldn't do that in a meeting because they'd feel like they were at school. But actually, that hand raise feature, you can't hide from the fact that someone wants to say something, but they just can't get a word in. Like, it's there. You can ignore it, but you can't hide from it. And I think that is actually a fairly, we should all get used to putting our hands up in meetings, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Chris, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, two things, I think. I think we have to deeply learn about each other. We're all working in tough times, and people have many, many issues that are outside of work for various different reasons. And I think if we deeply learn about each other and how we want to work together, how we collaborate, how we organize ourselves in meetings, that's going to go quite a long way to making sure we work together very well. I think the second thing is you're never really going to get to a point where everyone feels comfortable, where you're in a position where the team isn't already diverse. If it isn't, and if you are in a room, in a meeting, and everyone looks the same as you, that's definitely from my perspective, if there's one person in the room that doesn't look like me and they don't feel like they're included, that's going to be a massive challenge. So for me, I think we have to value diverse teams over individual talent in our recruitment and hiring process. If we've got candidates there that one will cause the team to be more diverse, and one will cause the team to be the same, but this person has greater capability and experience, we should value the first candidate, in my opinion.
Cool. That is super helpful. Hannah, I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about misalignment in communication. What are some of the early warning signs that communication or shared understanding is misaligned in your organization?
I have a very practical example of this. So at Accurex, we do every 2 weeks, every product team does a check-in with our leadership team. And this is basically to give updates on like, this was our OKR, this is progress against the OKR, this is what we're working on, risks, blockers, whatever it is you need to kind of update the leadership team on. And after that meeting, if your Slack is quiet, you did a good job. If there are 16 unread DMs because you have a bunch of questions that have come up, there's definitely misalignment of people expected one thing, and maybe in that meeting they didn't feel that they had the psychological safety to be able to raise that concern, or the thing they were thinking is not the thing you presented, and now they're confused about what they expected. That's a pretty good sign that you have some additional communication work to do.
Jason, you've been going through a merger, so...
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we have. I think that, but because of that, we're working quite a lot to try, that's like an identified area that we know there's going to be a problem, right? So we're putting quite a lot of effort into making sure that we, obviously you have your meet and greets with the people, and then you have your one-to-ones with people, and you, again, probably over-communicate a little bit, bore them a little bit with the same points, like there's 7 touch points or 15 or however many you actually have to have with them. But I think for me, more than even that, it goes back to the sales team and the kind of idea that when you know that things are going adrift, it's when you start hearing about things that you're selling that you don't have, or people making promises for things that you don't have or that aren't ready yet. And you have to stay close to the sales team to understand that and to get this feedback. But as soon as you start realizing that people are starting to make promises that write checks that your body can't cash, that's the point when you need to then try and get back on and maybe put your 16th touch point for communication in at that point.
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind on this subject is, even as a large company, we're always reorging constantly. And so, we brought together a couple teams that were doing very similar work across the company reviews, and progress was very slow, and it felt like we were missing a lot of context as we go launch. And I think the thing that stood out was, even being part of the same company and plenty of time spent talking, there was no trust built between these two teams, and there was a lot to work on. Both sides trusting they could work together, and aligning on everything, right? Like ceremonies, language used, what application from each side we'd adopt. And in the COVID era, right, it's hard to feel authentic, I think, when you're communicating and being on Zoom. And I think some of that stuff can come out very quickly, but a big theme, I think, on it is just like a lack of trust across the company.
Trust is a really important thing to build on, so I want to take that and run with it and come back to Chris and talk a little bit about how do you ensure that you're building trust with the folks that you work with. Obviously, product operations is very different from day-to-day product leadership. So how does trust factor into some of the work that you do?
From a personal perspective, I was saying this earlier, actually, I think a lot of the work that I do is talking to people. And I talk to a lot of people every day. And whether that's via Slack or on video calls or other asynchronous methods, I'm always talking to people. And going back to what I said earlier, I think you build trust by understanding and knowing each other. And that's definitely what I try to do. And also being a little bit humble and accepting that, particularly for us actually over the past year, not only with COVID, but we've been through an organizational change, a little bit like Sam said, we're huge, so it happens, in terms of both our org structure and our planning process. And actually just talking to people and saying, look, this is a mess right now, and it will improve and we'll get better, and we can do that together. And actually just having that humility to say that things might not be okay at the moment, but if we work together, we can get there. And that's how I build trust, at least from a personal perspective.
Okay, here's one that's open to the panel. Do you draw a distinction between sharing knowledge and sharing decisions? Why or why not?
I do not believe in democracy of decision making. I think that's kind of product's core job. I believe absolutely in ideas, but I think we run into issues when it seems like there's paralysis on trying to get everyone aligned, and it just is never going to happen. I think that's what makes a job complicated, right? It's always those decisions that are gray. And so I think input and communication sharing out and education, especially education for us and our teams from all of those different parts of a business are essential. But that's the line I would draw, is be very, very clear on, input is one thing that now we're deciding and this is now closed.
Yeah, I think it's about being able to back up your decisions. Like, I completely agree. We want product teams to be empowered, a bit of a cliche, but we do want that, right? We want people to be able to take all of that input, as you say, and bring that all together and make some fantastic ball of awesomeness out of it. But not everyone's going to agree with that. And again, if you're talking about a sales-led organization, then you're going to have people very specifically not agreeing with that because they think that this one thing, there's always that one feature that's going to win that next deal that never wins the next deal, but at least they tried. And I think that that's fair enough for people to want that, but to your point, it's really important to both be able to own the decision and share the decision in as many different forms as possible, but back it up with data or like reasons or that reason could be, well, yeah, look, this is our best guess at the moment based on the data or the information that we have at the moment. Yeah, no, we don't have 25 pages of discovery on that yet, but we've done enough that we can make this decision with some level of certainty. This is why, and we'll keep telling you as it progresses, I think is important.
Do you have anything to add?
I was, interestingly, on this point, I was thinking about knowledge as the process and like the decision as the end, which is just maybe how my mind thinks. But listening to what Jason was saying, I think there's knowledge around kind of everything.
Yeah.
So there is elements of trying to figure out that right balance of how much information do you give, and especially when you're communicating a decision, like how you communicate either its absoluteness or not. And I think the amount of knowledge or information that you have then is a key part of that. But you've given me a lot to think about, so now I'm probably going to reanalyze.
So thinking about kind of setting context and communicating across layers, like tell me a little bit about how you unpack that, because I think that that's really interesting, actually, like setting context at different levels or communicating the quote-unquote finality of a decision. How do you go about that day to day right now?
So I think this is an interesting thing that I've started experiencing more and more since I was promoted from product manager to senior product manager. At Accurex, that means that I also line manage some of our associate product managers and product managers, and that I also have more of a kind of leading role in the strategy and vision of our business unit. And I think that there's a lot to be said for making the decisions of what you communicate and with who and when. There's kind of this theory in product around being like the shield or the shit shield for your team, of that there's getting all these pressures from the head of engineering or from the head of product on different things, and you're trying to protect your team to get them on the hot path to meeting the goals. But I think this is the kind of thing that makes product so hard, because you could never write a how-to manual or read a guide to get it right. It's all based on like sensing the current situation, and if I confide in this person who is actually more junior, do I trust this person, and will they hold that information in the right regard, that won't get leaked to another place that then will turn out to reflect badly on me. And this is what makes working with people so difficult, because people are messy and we are emotional and we have all of these different things. But I think that's also what makes it like so fun and so dynamic and beautiful. So yeah, that.
Well said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that thing about finality is really interesting, though, because in theory, and I emphasize in theory, no decision is actually final, right? Because you always want to be in a position where you can do something different based on whatever happens in the future. Now, obviously, in practice, that sometimes doesn't happen because we work for companies. But I think the way I've seen it referred to is like, is it a one-way door or a two-way door? Like, you have to be super sure if it's a one-way door that you can't get back from. Whereas if it's a two-way door, sod it, just go through the door. I mean, you can always come back, right? So I think it's important to give people an understanding of like how much of a big deal this is and how much, what the stakes are and how easy it is to get back from that, because then coming to that trust point, they can really then, they should have more trust when they see those things happen or when they see the results or that you can recover from them.
How do you think about risk in communication and sharing updates?
As in the risk of oversharing or sharing the wrong thing, or because that's obviously a possibility, right? Like you could sit there and say, well, I've shared this stuff and it's too early and people shouldn't know this yet. To Hannah's point, it's like, yeah, that's fair enough. I'm generally would consider myself quite a sort of democratic oversharer. I like people to know what's going on. I like them to see inside the sausage factory, because ultimately, it was another cliche, but like the walls are glass, but you can't come in, right? It's like you should be able to see this stuff. There shouldn't be any secrets. But I guess the only caveat that I'd have there is, yeah, sure, if there's anything that would be existentially problematic for the company. I mean, I think that the Netflix example of like they share their financials with their internal team before they're actually published. So anyone could get in trouble for like insider trading or whatever with information that they don't have, that they shouldn't really have. But they share it anyway because that's their culture. And I think that kind of culture is what I'd probably push towards, and just treat people like grown-ups and hope that they can manage whatever it is that you give them, rather than try and hide stuff because you think that they can't handle it. I think it's really important to do that.
Can I respond to that?
Oh, yeah.
No, I think that's a really, really good point, and I'm all for information transparency. I think when I think about like some of the most difficult decisions that a product manager makes, it's often around like your team and performance, and those are often really sensitive. Yeah. And I have lots of people in my team who have and have not passed probation, and I've been a part of making that decision. And those are often really valuable leadership lessons that I've learned along the way, but can be a very sensitive thing to then bring up with someone else outside of the team who's not directly involved. So I think even though it is a great lesson for me to be able to share, how to kind of figure out the right balance. But I absolutely think financials should be super transparent, processes should be transparent, so very on board with that.
This connects, I think, to a couple of the other things we were talking about. I'd say I tend to take risks on information sharing towards building trust. That's also several things I've screwed up this year, where, depending on the subject, I might be sarcastic about it or call out what I think might be bullshit, even though it's coming from the top, let's say. And we end up in a position where we're kind of driving the agenda of something that maybe isn't necessarily our own. And so, you can quickly build trust with people when you're super transparent. It doesn't always play perfectly, and sometimes that's come back to bite me. But I think that's a way where, I think to everyone's point, right? Like sharing with your own team, sharing with other people. I tend to try to be a lot more optimistic with certain groups, just so that they don't lose faith, I think, in what we're trying to accomplish. But others want to hear that you also think this sucks, I guess, right? Yeah. So you have to kind of play, that was a shitty meeting, right? And some people that wins over that relationship, and others are like, oh God, if he thinks that was shitty, what are we doing here? So I just misstep a lot, and then over time, hopefully you build real trust because you're just being authentic about it, I guess.
But I think it's really important for people that really don't have necessarily a full understanding of how products get made, to understand how hard it is to make products as well, right? I don't want it to be like a black box where they just think, oh yeah, they just do some stuff and it's fine. It's like, no, actually this is a really hard job, and I'm not expecting them to share my pain, in this day to day, but they should at least be aware of all of the stuff that's going on and all of the decisions that you are making, because then that should give them more respect, in the same way that we should again have more insight into, for example, the sales process or the marketing process, or I think that we really owe it to ourselves and to our wider teams to the point earlier, really deeply understand how our days go, because everyone's job looks easy if you don't know what they're actually doing. And to build that trust and that kind of camaraderie, I think it is important.
Last question, I think, right? Last question. How do you set people up to understand values or principles in decision making or information sharing as a product leader? What are you doing to make sure that other people have an understanding of the way that you approach problems, to then make decisions with kind of like your thinking or your guidance?
So I wrote like effectively, I mean, I hate to use the word, but like a manifesto of like what the way that I approach product. Now,
Color me shocked.
there you go. It's available on my website for $99.99. But the point is that like I found it very helpful for myself actually, because my thinking evolves all the time. There's lots of great stuff out there, and I continue to learn all the time, and there's always like little tweaks and stuff like that. So I actually found it useful for myself and for the team, but also just to share with the company, like, this is how I think we should do product. This is how and why I think these things are important. And you could disagree with that, and we can have a chat about that, and maybe you change my mind, maybe I change yours. But just writing that down and kind of saving it and making it available to people, I felt was helpful, because at least people understand why you're doing what you're doing.
I think that it's a core part of our role to drive the principles of product towards anyone in the company. Obviously I think product is very interesting, and it's very common, I think, for that seems easier, why wouldn't you just do X? Everyone has a test idea, and I think that's great. I think democracy of ideas is important, and we just kind of can help validate, right? Like, let's help flesh this out. I do not care where they come from. Yeah. Before I got into product, I was very, very worried about, I don't know how I'm gonna have any ideas, and what I realized is you'll never not have 90 things to do, right? It's more about the prioritization of what 4 are you trying to make progress on. But all over the company, I think there's people that have that, and so how can you help them validate and probably rule it out, because that's most of the job, right? Is not spreading ourselves too thin. So I think it's an important thing of just those principles of how we think about it, how we're trying to scale addressable market. How start with the assumption, build the hypothesis. What data do we have towards that? How could you even measure this? Sometimes we all agree it's a great idea, and we realize there's no way to test this, right? So we can't take the risk. But I think that's a big part of what we should be communicating and just helping people understand, because they're not doing it every day and thinking about it and writing manifestos.
Chris?
Yeah, so I think as a non-product leader, but looking at product leaders quite often within Farfetch, I think it's definitely about sharing the context of the decisions that are made. So our VP of product sometimes is just going to have to make tough calls, because they have a deeper understanding of how the business is working and has a link to the exec board, that sometimes those decisions have to be made. It will come down to them as to how much context is shared and to what level. And then if you go down the hierarchy, obviously you will have associate product managers that are making decisions as well, and they should be empowered to do so. But it's going to be a much smaller scale decision, but that context still has to be shared somehow. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier about visibility of product changes. If there's a lot of things happening right down at that bottom level and that context isn't shared, that's just as bad as a VP making a product strategy choice and not sharing that context.
Fair. And you're obviously managing product managers at different levels. How are you sharing your thinking or values so that they can make informed decisions and grow on the job?
So I think it's an ongoing conversation, but I would boldly say, I'll take a step back, that the values that you use to make product decisions should be identical, if not very aligned to your company values. And if you're not doing it already, you should be hiring with alignment for company values, because it means that you'll build teams around people that have these kind of core principles in mind. And that will help them in their day-to-day make those decisions, because trying to train someone to have a value can be really difficult, especially if it's misaligned to something that they have already decided is something that they value. So if you hire for that in the beginning, everything would get easier.
Cool. Thank you all so much for your time. I know it is lunch, so y'all go eat and have a great rest of the day and rest of the summit. Thank you so much.
Thank you.